In an interview with Anderson Cooper on CNN, Bernie Sanders discussed Congress's latest attempt to deregulate the big banks and Wall Street. Now, let me remind you that this attempt is a bipartisan attempt to deregulate the biggest banks in the country. And if they actually are able to get this codified into law, then this allows banks to do what they did leading up to the 2008 crash. And of course, if we have another economic meltdown, who's going to be the one to foot the bill when these gigantic, too big to fail banks need to be bailed out? It's going to be us. We're going to have to do that. So Bernie Sanders discussed why he's opposed to this bill, and I wanted to share what he had to say because I think his insight is important, but there is something that I wanted to add.
I am strongly opposed to it. What this legislation would do is deregulate 25 out of the largest 38 banks in this country. It amazes me how short memories are in the United States Congress. In 2007, 2008, this country was hurled into the worst economic downturn in the modern history of this country because of the greed and the recklessness and the illegal behavior of major financial institutions. And what's happened since the deregulation, since Dodd-Frank, I should say, is we have seen the largest banks become even larger. What the CBO, Congressional Budget Office, reported just the other day, as you'll recall, is they said this moves us closer to the likelihood of another bank failing. Why would we want to do that? Banks are now making, in general, they have made in the last 2 years record-breaking profits. Yes, we want to help credit unions and small banks, but banks that are worth $250 billion in assets, those are not small banks.
Do you think a collapse like we saw in 2008 could happen again?
Of course.
Are there enough stopgaps in place?
Well, but that's precisely what they're doing. They're removing some of those stopgaps, and according to the CBO, it will make it more likely that some of these banks may fail, leading to a massive taxpayer bailout. But let me ask you this. I mean, I got to ask you this, is all over the country, there are issues on people's minds, whether it's guns, immigration, healthcare. It amazes me that this is the issue that the Republican leadership has put on the floor of the Senate. And you know why? Last year, the financial institutions spent $200 million in lobbying. Over the last 20 or 30 years, they have spent billions of dollars on campaign contributions. This is the corruption. What you're seeing is the corruption of the American political system, big money rules. And again, one of the things that I am upset about is that this banking bill, this bill for big banks, is now on the floor of the Senate. We're not talking about guns. We're not talking about the DACA issue. We've got 1.8 million young people eligible for DACA. Some of them may start being deported soon. The American people don't want that. We're not talking about that.
So there's a lot there that's really important. So let's kind of take the time to deconstruct what he's saying. So first of all, he's saying what the CBO and pretty much everyone else is saying about this bill. If it's passed, this increases the likelihood that we will have another economic crash. And if that happens, we're going to be the ones to have to bail out the big banks. It's going to be our tax dollars that go towards that. And to me, I find that completely unacceptable because I want our tax dollars to fund healthcare and education. But unfortunately for all of us, our tax dollars are going towards death, destruction, and Wall Street. Subsidies for the oil and gas industry. Subsidies for financial institutions that continue to gamble with our money that we deposit in the banks. It's unacceptable. So I don't want our money to be used for these crooks, to bail out these crooks. And furthermore, Bernie Sanders implied here that this bill is kind of a distraction currently because there are a lot of issues in the country that aren't being addressed because Republicans are trying to deregulate Wall Street. I mean, we have DACA, that hasn't been sorted out yet. We have gun reform, that's an issue that needs to be addressed. But instead, what's the priority for Republicans? Deregulating Wall Street. And we just have to take a moment to reflect on how brazen the Republican Party is because they've been in power now for more than a year, a little more than a year, but not that long overall. And what have they done? Policy after policy that they push for only serves the biggest financial institutions in the country, the richest oligarchs in the country. What have they given us that helps ordinary Americans? What have they done to help out the poor? They've done nothing because they don't care. Whenever they get in power, they try to shove through as much policies that deregulate and cut taxes for the wealthy as quickly as possible before they end up losing power again. That's all they're not even putting up this veneer that they give a fuck about Americans at all anymore. I mean, the mask is off. They are clearly the party of the rich. But unfortunately, Democrats have also revealed that they are the party of the rich as well because they were in power. Obama was president for 8 years, 2 terms. And what did he do for us? Not very much. Is he better than Trump? Yes. But in terms of really going the distance and helping out the poorest Americans, overall, a lot more Americans are even worse off now, in large part due to some of the policies that Democrats pushed. So when Bernie Sanders talks about this bill, I really think that even though what he said during this interview was on point, he needed to emphasize that this bill couldn't even be possible at all if it weren't for Democrats that decided to go along with it. I mean, you have to call Democrats out because, yes, even though Republicans, they're the ones pushing this. I mean, they control the national agenda currently since they are in control of all 3 branches of government. However, if you have an opposition party that's not resisting the most harmful policies, then what good is that opposition party? We can't just focus on the party in power. We have to look at the opposition party and find out what's wrong, because certainly if we don't have an opposition party that's effective, that's willing to fight and push back against the harmful policies that this administration is pushing and this party is pushing, then we're really fucked. It's not just the matter of voting out Republicans. I mean, if we have a party in opposition that is pushing for this, then what's to stop them from doing the same thing if they take power? Nothing. And I don't like the way that this bill is being marketed, and Bernie Sanders talks about that. I mean, this bill is supposedly something that's supposed to help out small banks and credit unions, but that's not happening. We're being gaslighted in the same way we were told that Trump's tax plan would help out the poorest Americans and middle-class Americans, but when we actually looked at the numbers, when the CBO crunched the numbers and independent analyses were conducted, what did we find out? That if you are poor and middle class, if you make less than $75,000 per year, you actually get a tax increase over a decade. So that bill increased taxes on the middle class in order to pay for tax cuts that were permanent for wealthy oligarchs. And it was sold to us as a tax cut for the middle class, and even the media went along with that narrative. And here we are again, where we have this bill, this plan to deregulate Wall Street being sold to us as a plan that would be great for small banks and credit unions, when who's going to benefit the most? The biggest financial institutions in the country. Look, here's the thing. Too big to fail should not be a thing. If a bank is too big to fail, you break that bank up. Because we can't have financial institutions so big that our economy will hinge on them being responsible. They're not responsible. They're looking out for the interests of their shareholders. They're trying to increase profitability. It's pretty simple. So that the fact that you would deregulate them, remove fail-safes, make it so that way they can do what they did in 2008, it makes no sense to me. So I am glad that Bernie Sanders is choosing to continuously speak out about this issue, and I am angry that this issue is taking focus away from the issues that are really important. We need to fix our crumbling infrastructure. We need a fix for DACA. Dreamers still don't have a solution. Their lives are still hanging in the balance. The state of politics in America, it's so difficult to not be demoralized when you see the priorities of both parties. I mean, for Republicans to continuously propose things that screw over the middle class, and for Democrats to go along with it. 17 Democrats, 16 technically, but including Angus King, a Democratic Party-leaning independent. It's disgusting.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.